Welcome to another Sunday. Thank you all for being here. It's my joy and pleasure to be here. So today, there's no small talk around this place. um, Many times I gear what the next live stream is going to be from sort of astounding news stories that come through my news feeds, and this is no exception. Recent discoveries about the cosmic background radiation, the so-called CMB, and its implications for the history of the universe, neutrinos, scalar waves, the James Webb telescope that can take so much better resolution pictures. And the first thing they want to do is look in dark places in the sky where there don't seem to be any stars and take extremely long exposures so they can capture faint light. And then, of course, what they see there is, a sky that's absolutely jam-packed with galaxies. That the deeper you go, the more intensely compacted stars and galaxy systems are, the further back you go. But the evolution of galaxies from, quote, the Big Bang, where in the beginning, the Big Bang just was sort of light. It took a while for the first elements to form, hydrogen and helium, and then it took more cooling and more expansion before this and that and this and that and the rest, and then stars could form and things like that. So when you look further back, you should see more and more sort of young, small, primitive galaxies the further back you go, right? And the James Webb telescope, when it looked back, saw large, old, well-formed galaxies where they shouldn't be. And then they saw large scale, old galaxies that were older than the Big Bang itself, 13.8 billion years ago, Big Bang. And these galaxies are older than that and well-formed and mature. And so what the hell does that mean? And the whole scientific community is throwing their hands up in the air. And the entire worldwide community is now in a state of chaos and sort of disbelief, and everybody's going back to the drawing boards and wondering, what do we do now? What does this mean? Obviously, the Big Bang is not what we thought it was, or it didn't happen when we said it we thought it was, or there was no Big Bang at all, and the whole thing is wrong. And of course, that's what we've been talking about on these live streams for 3 or 4 years now. So there's a segment of the scientific community that has never completely bought the idea of the Big Bang, or that it was something that came from nothing. Many call it the big oscillation, which I could think makes sense because everything is vibration. So if there was a massive oscillation of sort of expansion, creation, contraction to Big Bang, and expansion, creation, and contraction, and expansion, creation, contraction, that itself would be a sound wave. And there could be an infinite number of those in parallel universes, all fluctuating back and forth into maximum expansion, maximum compression, maximum expansion. Someplace in the expansion over those billions and billions of years, galaxies form and life forms on little planets, and people like you and me look through telescopes and say, oh, look at the wonder of it all. When in reality, where we're headed for is a big crunch that's going to cause an explosion. I don't know. It could be what we see with what I covered in a previous episode, a massive universal-sized sonoluminescence. And so if you remember sonoluminescence, you take a sphere filled with water, and you have two speakers facing each other through the water, and they play these sound waves, and the sound waves collide together in the center and create a bubble that expands and then collapses and creates something called cavitation. And the cavitation causes an explosion of light, brighter and hotter than our sun in a lab jar. They call it a star in a jar. And the cavitation creates this light. So light is produced from sound, following the biblical text where in the beginning was the word, the sound, and then there was light. So from that standpoint, what we call the Big Bang could be a cavitation event of sound waves colliding together on a titanic universal scale, creating an explosion of light that forms everything that we are, all in sort of like super slow-mo from our standpoint. And then that sonoluminescence, that explosion with the light, collapses back down again and creates another explosion and collapses, and another explosion and collapses, and does it so rapidly that the star in the jar appears to be solid. It's so fast you can't even see the flicker. So expand that to the size of the universe, and slow the time down from our standpoint to hundreds of billions of years, and you've got the great recurrence of Big Bang after Big Bang after Big Bang after Big Bang in an oscillation of a gigantic sound wave that is so titanically, stupendously large, and whose time is so slow between crest to crest, hundreds of billions of years, that it all seems frozen in time to us. But as we know, we have to expand our minds beyond the trivial timescales that we have around us in our ordinary life. If we want to sort of wrap our minds around these concepts about the true nature of reality, and it's not just the big thing, it's the small thing. It's you travel as deep as you can possibly imagine into the smallness beyond the Planck level, into the quantum foam of the quantum field, and you've got perhaps the same thing. You've got bubbles of the quantum foam that are expanding and popping and expanding and contracting, popping in and out of existence. And the logic of it makes sense because it's a reiteration of what we've heard in the ancient texts that I keep harping on. And it follows the rule that I see operating in the universe of sort of the fractal holographic rule, where the universe reflects inward and outwards specific types of rules and patterns that reiterate themselves at different time scales and different size scales. So when you see galactic networks in deep space, highways of coalescence of star systems and galaxies along, intergalactic highways, this sort of pattern, and that pattern looks a lot like the pattern of the connectome in the brain, pathways of neurons. That's sort of a fractal holographic reflection. That whatever we see out there, you can be sure that you're going to see it someplace inside of you, because it's all just one thing operating on the same rule. So as soon as you see a rule apply itself 2 or 3 times, you can pretty much extrapolate out that most likely that's repetitive, and it's going to keep going. Like back in 1986 when I stumbled on a brainwave frequency below delta with patients and EEG machines, and I'm thinking, they told us it was nothing below delta, and I'm seeing brain activity slower than delta. What does that mean? And then seeing confirmation of that with the patients coming up after a session going, oh my God, you won't believe what happened to me. I was like out of my body, flying through the ceiling. Or you won't believe what's been happening the last week since that session. I know what's about to happen. I know when the phone's going to ring, who's going to be on the phone. Precognitive stuff is happening. Weird stuff is happening in my life since you did that thing to me. So that showed me something, that the rule that I bought into, that there's just beta, alpha, theta, delta, and the ranges are this and this and this and this and this. 0.3, actually 0.5 hertz, the lowest delta, and 30 hertz, the highest beta. When I discovered that there's something below 0.5 hertz, then I start to question, how far does that go? Is this a pattern? Could there be frequencies higher than beta? And sure enough, they discover it. That's gamma at 40 hertz. So they have to readjust the frame of beta to be not 30 hertz, but 38 hertz. Because now we've got gamma at 40 hertz, and we've got hypergamma at 100 hertz, and we've got lambda at 200 hertz. So, I start thinking, I wonder if this frequency is slower than the epsilon. Maybe there's an epsilon 1 and an epsilon 2. One brain pulse, in delta at 0.5 hertz is one brain pulse every 2 seconds. So epsilon would be every 2 seconds to every 4 seconds. And epsilon 2 would be one brain every 4 seconds to every 8 seconds. And I wonder if there's anything slower than that. And sure enough, they discover it. It's default mode network at one pulse every 10 seconds to 20 seconds. And that extrapolated for me, okay, I see the trend. There's no reason to believe this ends anywhere. So that became iota, slower than default mode network, and frequencies above 200 hertz, which they already have discovered, all the way up to 2,500 brain frequencies cycles per second. 2,500. There's no end to it, really. We just don't know how to measure it or interpret what it means. It doesn't mean it's not there. So similarly, when we see the current news feeds about new discoveries in the cosmos, my brain immediately starts looking, where's the pattern? How does that pattern fractal relate to my brain, my consciousness, my personal experience here on Earth? How does it fit together? So that's where we start to travel into these crazy realms, where the title of this particular live stream, The Cosmic Symphony, New Observations of the Cosmic Background Radiation, the CMB, show that the early universe resounded with harmonious oscillations. No surprise, right? And the reflection of that is in the womb. For all of us, our first experience in the womb was floating in body temperature amniotic fluid, a float tank. Excuse me. And at 16 to 24 weeks, all my 5 senses come online for the first time, but I'm in the dark, so I can't see, nose and mouth filled with fluid. I can't smell, I can't taste, but sound travels through water 5 times better than air. So for all of us, that first 9 months of our first experience of being alive was a sound and vibration experience. the microcosm of in the beginning was the Word, you know, and a microcosm of in the beginning of the Big Bang was a harmonious oscillation that they, you know, in the ancient texts they called that in the beginning was the Om sound, the hum, the hum of the cosmic background radiation. It's just the sound waves are gigantic. They're so huge and gigantic, and the space between crest to crest of these waves are, you know, billions and hundreds of billions of light years, crest to crest. We can't hear it with our ears, but if our ear was large enough, we would. So when we have this, quote, Big Bang, and we have these various epochs of 10 to minus the 43 seconds, where we have quantum gravity era, and the Big Bang plus another 10 to minus 35 seconds inflation. And then we have the cosmic background radiation that's starting to expand with patterns built into it, that you take a little area of that and blow it up to what we have in the present day with galaxies and stars, and you know, at 14 billion years later, light and these sound waves, they call it gravitational waves, but they're sound waves. They're not electromagnetic. It's pure energy waves moving through a medium of the cosmic background radiation. And they've been since the very beginning. And it's my contention that that was the beginning, that the beginning was a sound, and that light had to coalesce later. And when you look at the history of the Big Bang, they actually say that it took a while for photons to appear. The first thing that happened was not an explosion, but a change of state from nothing to something. Actually, from nothing to everything. Pretty hard to wrap your mind around that one. But so now today, when we look at the patterns, these patterns that you can see in the cosmic background radiation, we can see these ripples. The ripples have been slowing down over time and getting less amplitude, so they're a little bit more difficult to look for. But those humps are there. It means that when we look at a galaxy like the Andromeda galaxy, it's actually bent across the top of a sound wave, so it's not flat. It's not a flat disk. It's a flat disk that's curved, laying on top of this gravity wave, this sound wave thing. And those oscillations from the very beginning of everything are called baryonic acoustic oscillations. The baryon acoustic oscillations, or BAO, I love these little words they make up, are oscillations of the tightly coupled baryon photon plasma in the early universe imprinted on the matter power spectrum of the CMB, of the cosmic background radiation, which means that there's a reflection of that inside your own consciousness. There's a reflection of that in the connectome of the brain itself, a frozen sound wave that generated photons. So at the very beginning of all things, we have this Big Bang, which is really the conversion of nothing into everything. And as it goes through these various epochs of where we had talked before about dark energy and dark matter, which make up 95% of this whole business we're talking about. You know, this whole thing that we can see with the cosmic background radiation forming these tendrils and highways where all the galaxies and the stars are being attracted to flow along these distinct pathways, is mostly dark matter and dark energy, as we discussed before. So the whole business back here that we're talking about of the Big Bang and the coalescence of all this stuff and the CMB forming patterns that look like brain patterns, underlying the whole thing are these baryon acoustic oscillation things frozen in time and space, forming this cosmic background radiation of patterns. We have all kinds of exotic particles that are spinning from this process, where we had like the dark age before photons showed up, and then photons show up, but in the beginning was the sound. And then we have this expansion thing going on where it's expanding out and expanding faster than it should because of just an explosion. It's the repelling power of dark energy that's pushing the expansion faster. And then dark matter is putting the brakes on that. Otherwise, it would be a runaway reaction. And so that means that this baryon acoustic oscillations are actually oscillations of dark matter. Dark matter could consist of particles so ultralight they behave more like waves. Well, duh. So these waves that spin out from the initial explosion of the cavitation event of the Big Bang are, you know, hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of light years crest to crest as they move out. And galaxies and star systems and nebula form themselves down into these troughs. And now we are dealing with exactly the same thing that we see with the sand patterns on a metal plate, where you play a certain frequency through the metal plate and you see the sand forming these cool, like geometric patterns. And it's got all these lines forming this cool geometry. And that geometry changes depending on what frequency you're playing through the metal plate. Change the frequency, everything morphs around, forms a new pattern of the sand. And when you look closely enough at the sand lines, you realize that they're not lines at all. It's you're being fooled. They're standing waves. The sand is falling into the trough of the sine wave ripples moving out through the metal plate with this frequency. So the frequency is making the metal plate do this thing, do this ripply thing in different patterns. And the crests of those ripples, the sand particles slide off that smooth mountain down into the little valleys of the bottoms of the ripples and form these apparent lines that aren't really there. Same thing here is the stars and the galaxies, the nebulas, and all the matter is falling, sliding down into these troughs. And the ripple patterns are not as nice and easy as this. There's an infinite number of ripple patterns that are all blending and interacting together. It's like, so this diagram would be like dropping a pebble into a still pool of water, and you have these nice ripples that come out. But if I dropped 20 little pebbles, then they would all be creating these patterns, and all those patterns would be interacting and creating cross lines, and so that's pretty much what we see in the cosmic background radiation, is these multiple ripples that are all interacting with each other, forming all kinds of different pathways and highways and patterns. An artist's concept of the latest highly accurate measurement of the universe from the BOSS, which is another baryon acoustic oscillation thing. The spheres show the current size of the baryon acoustic oscillations from the early universe, which have helped to set the distribution of galaxies that we see in the universe today. Galaxies have a slight tendency to align along the edges of the spheres. The alignment has been greatly exaggerated in this illustration. The baryon acoustic oscillations can be used as a standard ruler to measure the distances of all the galaxies in the universe. How cool is that stuff? It's pretty mind-blowing. Put your headphones on for a second and listen to this little piece.
Immediately after the universe was born, it was too tiny and too hot for protons, electrons, and even photons to exist. Within a second, it had expanded and cooled enough for protons and neutrons, collectively called baryons, to form. Almost instantly, there was a rapid burst of sound waves triggered by tiny variations in this particle soup. Scientists call these waves baryon acoustic oscillations. The pressure waves traveled outward for 400,000 years until the universe thinned and cooled enough for light to travel through it. The universe became transparent, and the waves froze in place. Over time, the denser regions formed by the waves encouraged more star and galaxy formation than other areas. The imprint of those waves expanded with the universe, slowly accelerating due to dark energy. Today, with our snapshot of the universe, there is a slight tendency for galaxies to be separated from each other by a distance related to that expanding ring radius. Although difficult to see, it is detectable as a slight bump through careful surveys of many galaxies.
Cool, huh? The Titanic scales that we're dealing with here, and the Titanic time scales and size scales, are a real stretch of the imagination. The concept that everything we see is the result of massive titanic sort of pressure waves, sound waves. It's a little difficult to describe because, as I've said before, our definition of the word sound is anemic and deficient. We don't have a lot of words in our language to describe sound, the second great force of the universe. We have a lot of words to describe light and photons, the visual part of the universe, the part on the electromagnetic scale. But when it comes to the sound part of the scale, that is not part of the electromagnetic spectrum, but is pure energy moving through a medium at a certain frequency, whether that frequency be between 20 and 20,000 hertz, where this mechanism can interpret it, or whether it's below 20 hertz where we can feel it as resonance vibration in a different sense organ of our skin, or if it's slowed down so far that it is like these gravity waves that have a crest to crest of millions or billions of years. All of that could technically, we'll have to call it sound, because there's no other word in the language to describe what happens or what it is beyond 20 to 20,000 hertz. We mistakenly think that if it's outside of 20 to 20,000 hertz, it's not sound anymore. And that's actually technically true. If you interpret the definition of sound as being something you can hear with this mechanism. But if we expand sound beyond the hearing of this mechanism, then we can call the whole business sound. That the baryon acoustic oscillations would be sound, but large sound, slowed down sound, the frequency is so low that this couldn't hear it. But a bigger ear of consciousness can hear it, because consciousness is not constrained by the definitions and the boundaries that we see with this physical envelope that we've got right here with this, or even with our mind. Our imagination can take us anywhere. It's one of the 7 yogic powers to be able to, at will, expand yourself infinitely large or shrink yourself infinitely small. What's doing that is mental power, the power of imagination, power of a thought before a thought fires in your brain. A very sort of mystical state of consciousness where you can travel and be any size, and you can accept these concepts that we're talking about right now and see them from different sort of perspectives. If we could imagine ourselves growing to be infinitely large, so that the size of our ear related to the baryon acoustic oscillations would make those oscillations something within the range of hearing, you would be able to hear this tone, this hum of the universal sound. The fact that it's frozen in time and space from our limited perspective in this particular body, who has a lifespan of, 80 or 90 years, if you sweep that away and take consciousness as a pure thing that can be any size you need it to be, then expand it out to universal size and listen to this tone, and shrink it down to a Planck length size and listen to the sounds of quantum foam. All of it is this holographic, fractalized mathematical relationship of all the parts and pieces of the universe at different scales, at different sizes, and different times. That's all one huge homogeneous chord. Perhaps instead of a universe, a single verse. It's multi-lyric. It's more of musical than a written or a spoken. And it looks like this. These highways and pathways and intricate tangle is actually related to crossing over of these spherical, expanding baryon acoustic oscillations that are titanically and gigantically large, flowing at unimaginably slow speeds, frozen in time to us. I think they're still moving. They said they froze in time, and I don't believe it, because it doesn't follow the general rule we see operating every place else. It would be an anomaly if that was the case. I think it's still moving. It's just slow from our perspective. But this looks just like what's going on in the brain, of how neurons line themselves up on these same kind of tangled pathways. It looks just about exactly like this. Which means that most likely when our bodies were first being grown, we had our own version of the Big Bang in our own consciousness. At some point in the womb, it was just the void. And then all of a sudden, there was an explosion, and your consciousness came online, and you realized that you're there, but you don't know where there is. You're just a mode of consciousness in a void. And you don't have thinking power because there's no language yet. And then that expands this brain out, like we see these diagrams of the Big Bang expanding and cooling out and forming tangled patterns. Here's the tangled patterns here, these sulci and gyri. The noodles are called a gyrus, and the sulcus is the groove. The magnificence of this thing that can contemplate the universe and itself. Galactic clusters and filaments are surrounded by voids that contain very little matter. Altogether, the cosmic web looks somewhat like a human brain. To be more precise, the distribution of matter in the universe looks a little like the connectome, the network of nerve connections in the human brain. The weird hum coming from the start of the universe. Echoes of baryon acoustic oscillations can still be found today within the cosmic background radiation, cosmic microwave background, picked up by the Planck Space Telescope. It's this diagram here. In the first few 100,000 years after our universe was born, a primordial hum ripped through a plasma of superheated particles. Scientists are listening in the hope of gaining new insights about the mysterious force known as dark energy. Cosmic harmonics. The sound spectrum of the early universe had overtones, much like a musical instrument's. If you blow into a pipe, the sound corresponds to a wave with maximum air compression, which is the blue part, at the mouthpiece, and the maximum reflection, which is red, at the end piece. But the sound also has a series of overtones with shorter wavelengths that are integer fractions of the fundamental wavelength itself, the fundamental tone that you're playing. So the wavelengths of the first, second, and third overtones are 1/2, 1/3, and 1/4 as long. And this kind of thing is exactly what we're seeing in the baryon acoustic oscillations in the universe. Not only is there a huge ripple pattern, but there are sub-patterns and harmonics and overtones of that original sound that make all of those ripple patterns that we're expanding out and creating interactions with each other way more complex, because not only is it just single tones creating ripple patterns, but it's all their harmonics and overtones that also have sub-ripple patterns within ripple patterns that are also interacting. And that's the reason why the cosmic background radiation looks the way it does. So once again, we've got, this whole expansion where this original oscillation is coming directly from the very beginning, and it's only after a certain while that light can even be a thing. Sound comes first, then there comes light. And of course, in the standard model, what's spinning out of all this as it all cools are all these particles in all kinds of different families and generations, and neutrinos and scalar waves. And this whole thing with neutrinos, there's a neutrino to go with every particle. So there's electrons and muons and tau particles, and there's also tau neutrinos and muon neutrinos and electron neutrinos. And then there's all this other weird stuff like the quarks, strange quarks and charms and ups and downs and tops and bottoms. It's like, but this concept of neutrinos spinning out of all of this that are still there now. I mean, at any given second, there are trillions of neutrinos passing through everything you see and everything you know, and including you and your brain. and through the entire Earth and the whole planet. And they're so small and so that they don't touch a single piece of matter all the way through the whole planet of Earth. They don't interact with anything. They're ghost particles, and there's trillions of them. We're being bathed of them all the time. In order to even measure them has been a titanic effort worldwide for decades and decades to try to capture just one interaction of a neutrino with anything. Neutrinos, the key to a theory of everything. So neutrinos have been hitting the limelight in the last few years, and it's been intensifying more and more, particularly since the things that have been seen with the James Webb Telescope. According to the standard model of particle physics, neutrinos were originally thought to have no mass. But in 1998, physicists found clear evidence that the three known types of neutrinos, electron, muon, and tau, can oscillate or change among each other, which is possible only if the particles have mass. And the reason they thought that neutrinos had no mass is because they can pass through a whole planet and everything in it and never touch anything, never interact with anything. Right? If they have no mass, they couldn't interact, even if they did interact. But then when they're doing their atom smasher thing and they see particles spinning out and they measure the angles they spin because they can predict what that spin what angle should look like, and their measurements aren't making any sense because no two collisions show the same pattern, which it should. And then they realized that the three sort of flavors of neutrinos can, at a whim, change into any other neutrino. So a Tau neutrino can just change into a muon, and a muon can change into an electron neutrino, and at will, at random. And so all of a sudden, when they realized that, they realized they couldn't make that kind of a change unless they had mass. And as soon as they realized they had mass, they started trying to set up experiments to measure them, because they know that sooner or later there has to be an interaction if it has mass. So neutrinos could explain why the universe didn't just disappear after the Big Bang. Studying the fundamental particles known as neutrinos could reveal why there is any matter in the universe at all. And this is a bit more complex than just neutrinos. At the core is the slight lack of perfect symmetry at the moment of the Big Bang. Because of that slight lack of symmetry, then things would spin out and not be homogeneous. If the symmetry was perfect, then everything would just turn to nothing. Nothing would coalesce into anything. Nothing. In other words, the only reason that I can see anything is because my eyes are tuned to a narrow spectrum of light particles that form color in the electromagnetic spectrum, 407 to 750 nanometers. That's what my eyes are sensitive to. So because I can't see any of the frequencies before or after that narrow bandwidth, then things appear to have spaces around them. It's just an illusion. It's an illusion of my eyes, because my eyes can only see a narrow spectrum, so everything else appears to be nothing there, invisible. And the same thing with hearing. The only reason I can hear anything at all is because I can't hear above 20,000 or below 20 hertz. So it makes that thing stand out. If I could expand my vision to encompass all frequencies, I would see nothing because I would be seeing everything. So it's the same dilemma as we have here. If the universe didn't have an asymmetry, then we wouldn't have matter coalescing out with a, quote, space around it. Now we know that the space is not a space. It's dark matter, dark energy. And that the matter that we see is just 5% off the top. So neutrinos play a big part in this because we have neutrinos and we have antineutrinos. And the mix of neutrinos versus antineutrinos is also breaks symmetry, which is why we have matter and antimatter. And antimatter we can't see, and matter we can. But the matter that we do see and that we interact with is only 5% of the whole mix. The rest of that is invisible. That's dark energy, dark matter. And there's no reason to believe, once we see the pattern emerging, that we don't have, anti-dark matter and anti-dark energy as well. I'm waiting for them to come up with that one. But mark my word, it's on its way. Once the universe reveals its fractalized pattern and you see a little piece of it, you can extrapolate it out and you know what's coming. So they have to build these unbelievably expensive and intricate pools of a certain type of chemical fluid to try to capture a neutrino as it passes through the earth and interacts with something in this water. They have these things built deep under the ground, and they've had them for decades, looking for a single flippin' interaction of a neutrino with something, anything, to prove that they have mass. We're looking for them in atom smashes. We smash the atoms together and we get these spinning particles spinning out. We know what each one of these curves mean because we've already predicted what it's going to look like. To confirm to us that neutrinos come in 3 flavors, that we have quarks and charms and they're up and down and different colors. And it's when they see something that they're not expecting, like a straight line that they weren't looking for, which has just happened in the news in the last week, that the latest discovery is a 4th neutrino. Because the 3 neutrinos and their anti-neutrino pairs, that makes 6, there's something missing in the math. It doesn't add up unless you have another neutrino. And they think that they've just discovered it, and they're calling it a sterile neutrino. And they haven't been able to find this one or measure it. And this one may actually have no mass. The whole concept of these neutrinos, which, by the way, the letter is a V that stands for neutrino. Electron neutrino and muon neutrino and tau neutrino. Remember, these are passing through your body all the time, from cosmic rays, from solar neutrinos coming from the sun, and geoneutrinos coming from the earth. And they're passing through your body, billions, trillions of them every second, and they don't touch a single atom in your body. Interesting, mind-blowing, actually. This whole concept of neutrinos and scalar waves, which spin from that. So when we get into scalar waves, we're getting into the truly exotic, because it's sort of like as a noise-canceling headphones. So when I put noise-canceling headphones on, and I'm on an airplane. As soon as I put those on, I flip the little switch on. It's got a battery inside. I flip the switch on, I put the headphones on, and all the low frequencies of the jet airplane engine noise and all of that just disappears. I can still hear conversations. I can still hear people talking. Now all of a sudden I can hear it very clearly. But all of that disturbing low-end rumbling vibration of the jet engines is missing now. And how that's accomplished is each of those headphones has a microphone, digital microphone, and they're making digital recordings of the ambient noise around you and playing it back into your ears. And one of the two ears is rotating that sound wave 180 degrees out of phase upside down. And now well, actually it's doing it in both ears. So it's taking the ambient sound and taking the lower 1,000 hertz of that sound and twisting it 180 degrees out of phase so that all the wave crests that go upward are meeting the same wave crest turned upside down backwards, and the two cancel each other out, and that's why we can't hear it. Phase cancellation, 180 degrees out of phase. Sound will phase cancel itself. I propose that the same thing could be used for electromagnetic disturbance of 60 cycles in your walls. That we should be able to plug a device into the circuit that would sort of play that back on top of itself 180 degrees out of phase and phase cancel the disturbed frequencies coming out of the walls, so we would have noise canceling headphones for electromagnetic frequencies, clear the space. It's sort of what is being alluded to with this guy, Konstantin Mayel. I studied with this guy. He's a Russian scientist who's the world expert on scalar waves and neutrinos. When you have electromagnetic waves, when you have all these particles, you've got all the particles that make up the electromagnetic universe as the Big Bang expanding out. And we've got neutrinos in 3 flavors, plus their antineutrino pairs. And now we may have a 4th, a stereoneutrino. And we can suspect that there would have to be an anti-sterile neutrino as well, because that's the pattern, and then we can extrapolate. We know it's coming. When electromagnetic fields interact, and they happen to interact 180 degrees out of phase, they collide and phase cancel, but the energy is still there. And that energy spins into a faster than the speed of light universe. That's the mirror image of our own, that where for us, nothing can go faster than the speed of light. There, nothing can go slower than the speed of light. So these sort of fantastical, sort of other universal mirror image particles that you would call scalar waves operate in a completely different way. And how you generate them is you create a copper wire winding that turns back on itself and forms a sort of a torus where it forms a figure 8 back and forth on top of itself like a Mobius strip. And that maximizes the electrons colliding together 180 degrees out of phase to generate a maximum amount of these scalar waves. Any place you have electromagnetic fields, you have scalar wave generation automatically because the two go together. Can't have one. It's like electromagnetism It's like electricity flowing forms a magnetic envelope at right angles, and a scalar field. A simple test of that is to take your cell phone and stick it in a microwave. The microwave is an advanced form of Faraday cage. We need to block the microwaves from exiting outside of this microwave box so it doesn't cook your organs, if you're standing nearby. So we know that you can stand right next to a microwave and you don't cook your organs. So it means that the Faraday box is working. So therefore, if you put your cell phone in there in that Faraday box and you close the door, you shouldn't be able to get the phone to ring, right? But you can. Right? You can dial up your phone and it will ring inside that microwave. I'm not saying don't turn the microwave on or explode your phone. I'm just saying use it as a Faraday cage. And the only explanation for how it could receive the signal is the scalar wave portion of the electromagnetic signal that's coming to it. So I spent, I think it was 3 or 4 days in an intensive workshop with this guy when he was here in California. That was back in the 90s. Fascinating guy. And it really opened my mind to a world that I didn't even know was there. His theory on Pangaea was pretty mind-blowing. We've all seen these pictures of the original Earth where all the continents were just one big giant landmass, right? And then as time went on, the land masses all started to drift apart until we've got the map we see today. And his questioning was, nobody's been able to answer the question, why did they drift apart? What would make them drift apart? There's no geological mechanism that anyone has ever explained. It's all based on the fact that we know they all fit together. So if we took a map with movable continents and kind of shifted them around, we'd see they all fit together like jigsaw puzzle pieces. So therefore, they must have drifted apart. That's it? That's the old total explanation? I don't think so. His idea was that neutrinos, since they have been discovered to have the slightest little bit of mass, are streaming forth from the sun and the cosmic background radiation all the time. Particularly the sun is spewing them out, and they're passing all the way through the Earth. And if you look at the Earth, and you look through the different crust layers, down in the center is this massive iron core, supposedly a giant ball of iron. But that doesn't track with the physics of the kind of pressure that's brought to bear at the center of this massive planet of rock and dirt and stuff. Because even if you just go down a little bit into the second layer, the rock has melted into lava, magma. It can't stay solid. So scientists are saying that in the center of the Earth is a solid iron ball, are out of their minds. There's no way it could be solid. And the pressure way the hell out here is already liquefying. That means by the time it gets into this zone, it's got to be a gas. And by the time it gets into this zone, it's got to be a plasma. Once it's a plasma, it has special properties. And a plasma is a fourth state of matter. The plasma fields coming from the sun that contain neutrinos, a plasma is the only thing in the universe that neutrinos freely interact with. That means that a certain percentage of the neutrinos over the last 4.5 billion years of the Earth's development have been interacting with the plasma at the center of the Earth, and the plasma has been trapping them. And because they have mass, over time, that mass is piling up and adding volume to the plasma ball, plasma sphere at the center of the Earth, making it bigger. And as it gets bigger, it puts pressure on all the mantles, all the layers of the mantles. This is getting larger and larger and putting pressure out and expanding the diameter of the Earth itself. And as the eons go by, the original Earth that was smaller, that was completely covered by a continent with little rifts between it, those started to tear apart as the Earth got larger and larger, blowing up like a balloon, because the plasma sphere at the center of the Earth is collecting neutrinos from the sun. So here we could see the original Earth in the beginning, where all the continents are squeezed up together into a solid mass, projected outward as the Earth expands, so that these masses would push apart from each other, sort of on the surface of a balloon that was expanding. So how's that for a mind blower? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that this guy was talking about for 3 days in an intensive workshop. And the bigger picture is that neutrinos, and in particular the scalar waves that issue forth from that are also passing through us from another sort of dimension, are the field of influence that may be consciousness itself. That this concept of dark energy in the universe and neutrino fields and scalar fields all mixed up together into a massive thing that doesn't have words to describe it might be the sort of morphogenic field of consciousness itself that has that the 5% of matter follows the unhidden rules that force matter to follow along these rules, so we can see what the rules look like. Physicists suggest they may have discovered the answer to the mystery of consciousness itself. Physicists suggest they have discovered the answer, and the answer from this article is neutrinos. The neutrino field may be the universal field of consciousness. And it's not just those guys. This is a PubMed article for National Library of Medicine. Neutrinos, the mind, and the theory of everything. That not only is it the neutrino fields with the scalar fields behind them, and the dark matter, dark energy counterpoint of the default mode network function of the brain, which is 95% of brain function, with only 5% off the type of everything we think it all is. That's an exact reflection of what we see in the universe itself, where 95% of the universe is dark energy, dark matter, and only 5% is physical matter that we can see through a telescope or a microscope or around us in this physical world. Those two reflect each other exactly. The pattern there tells me that we're soon to discover that the default mode network is divided into two parts, the same configuration that we would see in dark energy and dark matter, where dark matter is, dark energy is, 68%, and dark matter is 27% or something like that. I'm expecting that they'll find something similar going on in the default mode network. There's two divisions in there that are doing different things. But it extends into completing neutrinos and scalar waves, completing the theory of everything, where everything would be explained by simple rules that are reflected as fractals and holograms throughout the whole universe, no matter what the scale. Some of the esoteric literature already talked about something like this, where the brain itself, why we've got two hemispheres, and why we've got two eyes, why there is a stereo right-left mirror image separation. Why has the body designed itself in a right-left mirrorized form? Why a right hand and a left hand? Why a right eye and a left eye, a right nostril, left nostril, right hemisphere, right ear, left ear? You know, right spinal cord, left spinal cord. Why is that important? Number one, it's important for 3D perception. Number two, if you're damaged when you've still got one left. Number three is how a hologram is made back in the old days. You have an object, and then you have a laser shining on that object, and you've got a little mirror, a triangular prism mirror that splits half that laser beam off to another surface, so it bounces off something else before it passes to you. So you've got a reference beam and then a collateral beam, and where they cross over creates a moire pattern on the exposed film. And when you shine a laser through that moire pattern, you get the original image in 3D that you can look around and see it. It's a perfect metaphor for why we might need a right eye and a left eye and a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere, where one is always the reference and the other is the bounce beam. As we interpret neutrinos and antineutrinos, a neutrino and an antineutrino, a scalar wave and an anti-scalar wave, an electron and a positron, and how we are interacting with the universe as a conscious field has something to do with mirrors, smoke and mirrors. I mean, technically, if I took my two eyes and if I look closely enough at you, if we were together, if I looked really closely into the black part of my eye, I would see a reflection of me looking at you. And therefore, if I took my two eyes and I looked pointing them towards each other, I'd see an infinite hall of mirrors or reflections of these two eyes looking at each other. I would see my infinite self. It's why when the brow chakra activates spontaneously on its own the way it's supposed to be, as the energy moves up through the chakras, without me, small mind, trying to make it happen. The medial muscle of the eyeballs both contract and the eyes try to look into each other. I try to see my infinite self when the brow chakra opens. So somehow we're all mixed up with this whole thing. We're mixed up with the cosmic background radiation and the patterns that reflect patterns in our brains, with neutrinos and antineutrinos in 4 flavors, and scalar waves that can't go slower than the speed of light. And our consciousness is right dead center in the middle of all of that, creating the universe moment by moment. And that is why we're all here, to link the various aspects of our individual consciousness all together, aligned by the science of brain entrainment, to entrain our brain waves to exactly the same space, to awaken the common mind, the mind field, not minefield, but mind field that we're all part of. So with that, headphones, please. And here we go. So, it could be that the whole thing is a giant cosmic joke, and the original sound coming from the Big Bang was nothing but a belly laugh from the mind of God. So thank you all for being here. Love and blessings. May you all be happy, healthy, and holy. Take care of yourselves until the next time I see you next Sunday. As usual, I will let the forums continue for a little while here, so people can continue in the chat. So thank you all very much.